The Algerian boxer at the center of a gender row at the Olympics has it back at the bullying she suffered and vowed winning gold will be the best response. Imane Khelif has faced a storm of online hate with accusations she isn't a woman after failing eligibility tests at last year's Boxing World Championships. That tournament was organized by the International Boxing Association, whose president reportedly claimed the fighter had male XY chromosomes. However, Olympic chiefs in charge of boxing in Paris insist she meets all criteria with a gender and age based on her passport. Imane's first bout sparked uproar when her Italian opponent quit after 46 seconds, claiming she'd never felt a punch like it. Online outrage followed, with Donald Trump posting a video of the fight with the message, "I will keep men out of women's sports." Other figures such as Elon Musk, author J.K. Rowling, and Italy's government have piled on to the hate, with unsubstantiated claims that she is transgender. However, Khelif was born a woman, has never identified as a man, transgender, or intersex, which refers to people who have male and female sex characteristics. Algeria's Olympic Committee says she's been the target of baseless propaganda from certain foreign media outlets. Her father, Omar, told Sky News, "My child is a girl. She was raised as a girl. She's a strong girl." Imane's been competing in international tournaments as a woman for years, including the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. She's lost 9 of her 52 fights against female fighters. It's not a record that screams unfair advantage. As for Imane, she remains defiant, and in an interview with SNTV warned bullying can destroy people. Before winning her second fight, her Hungarian opponent posted a provocative image depicting Beauty versus the Beast on Instagram. Khelif is guaranteed at least a bronze and has become the first female Algerian boxer to claim a medal. She'll fight in the semi-finals on Tuesday, but her achievement has been completely overshadowed. Fellow boxer Lin Yuting from Taiwan is facing similar accusations at these games. If either wins gold, can you imagine the media storm that will follow?
Welcome to This Week in Africa, a collaborative effort between African Stream and Authentic African, where we break down today's news stories in the continent of Africa and around the world, affecting Pan-Africanism and Africa's independence. Today, we talk about America's meltdown over Algerian boxing Imane Khelif, the Algerian boxer who won gold after her gender was wrongly questioned. She clinched the gold medal for the women's welterweight division at the 2024 Paris Olympics. Her victory is not just a personal triumph, but a historic achievement for Algerian sports, making her as the country's first female boxing gold medalist. Her path to Olympic glory, however, was fraught with adversity, stemming from controversial disqualification by the International Boxing Association, the IBA, which falsely alleged she failed a gender eligibility test. The International Olympic Committee, IOC, defended Khelif, dismissing the claims as unfounded and condemning the associated criticism as hate speech. So stay tuned.
Oh, okay. Looks like journalist Joe is offline. Let me see if he is able to get back on. These are some of the tech struggles when we are working from different parts of the world. Okay, he's on his way back. He has the opening that he wants to present, so I'll wait for him to get back on. Okay, well, I'll just start my introduction, and then when he gets on, he can introduce himself. So, my name is Inemesit Richardson. I'm a journalist with African Stream. I am based out of Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. Yeah, okay, here he is. He's coming back on like right now. Let me add him. Welcome back, Joe. So I did the introduction.
Okay, great. And I apologize, everyone. Technical difficulty. My name is Joe Hatagwa. I am the founder of Authentic African, a platform meant to bridge the gap between Africans living on the continent and Africans living in the diaspora. We do everything from helping people visit, move, or invest on the continent of Africa. So with that, we should get into today's stories. This one is a sensitive topic, but an important one. And because it affects a particularly African athlete, we wanted to make sure we covered this story because it is a historic moment for the country of Algeria. And also there were folks in the West who we normally talk about on this platform, of course, having things to say. So with that, I think maybe what makes sense then is to kind of talk a little bit about the media firestorm that came immediately after the initial boxing match between Khelif and the Italian boxer, and what immediately followed. So I'll give a little bit of context there, and then what we'll do is we'll throw to a video that that kind of shows you what the Western reaction was. It is a direct depiction of that. So the controversy surrounding Khelif began at the 2023 World Championships, where she and Taiwanese boxer Yu Ting were disqualified based on IBA's gender equality test that included chromosome analysis, alleging revealing XY chromosomes. The IBA's decision and methodology have been widely criticized for lacking transparency and due process, leading to disputes with the IOC. So the IOC, which is the International Olympic Committee, has supported Khelif and Yu Ting, allowing them to compete under Olympic rules and recognizing them as women, challenging the IAB stance. Amidst this backdrop, Khelif didn't only showcase her incredible spirit and skill at the Olympics, but also became a national hero in Algeria and a beacon for discussions on gender identity and fairness in sports. Her legal battle against the online harassment has endured highlights and broadens and the broader implications of her journey, both with and beyond the sports world. So let's just quickly jump into a video that kind of shows how the West immediately responded after the initial boxing match, where Italian boxer actually quit after early into that first round.
It is true, though, certain phrases get amazing response, like, I will keep men out of women's sports. Now you find out I'm right. I used to use the barbells. I thought, now all you have to do is look at the boxers. This young girl from Italy, a champion boxer, she got hit so hard she didn't know what the hell hit her. It's a person that transitioned. He was a good male boxer. Yeah. He was a good male boxer. And she didn't even go down. He hit her with 2 jabs and she said, I'm out.
So clearly misinformation there. There was a whole backstory that just was made up, right? And I think it's really important to call that out because there haven't been any reactions from those who made these comments publicly. I think in the video we played earlier to start the live, we had William explaining the story and mentioned that J.K. Rowling, Elon Musk, and then of course Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, all mentioned these things publicly. Because they're not a news outlet, technically, I guess it's not required that they do a retraction. However, a retraction is necessary, right? I mean, in this case, we see that those folks did not do that. Before we move on to the next video, Inem, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. As you know, as we've talked about this separately, and this conversation I think is a sensitive one. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts, you know, with all the information we now have, like about, you know, her background, her story, and the responses that we saw from those in the West and in Western media.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like the question that I feel like is being asked by a lot of people is whether or not she has an unfair advantage over other women. And this is a question, this is something that I see all over the place right now. You know, does she have an unfair advantage? Does she have an unfair advantage? You know what? I think she does have an unfair advantage. I think she does. I think also that I would like to play for the Nigerian women's basketball team. But I can't, because those women have an unfair advantage over me because I'm 5 foot tall and they're like a foot taller than me. You know, I think that there's plenty of people who would like to be, you know, all sorts of different sports stars, compete maybe as, you know, Olympic swimmers, this and that. But unfortunately, a lot of the other swimmers have unfair biological advantages because, you know, they have longer arms or longer legs. It's kind of how sports works. So I think it's just kind of disgusting the way that the media and the world has treated this woman in particular. I think that we have entered into a very, very dangerous like territory in the way, not we as, you know, you and I, but I guess, you know, I mean, humanity as a whole, in the way that we're addressing this question. All sorts of questions and concerns then come up about, you know, who is a woman and who is a man and how do you measure that, this and that. And I just think that, you know, this is a woman who is from Algeria. We do know that she isn't a trans woman. She was, you know, she's a cisgender woman. She was born a woman and she's still a woman. She's from a country where it's almost like, you know, I mean, there's very, very little pathways for somebody like where she lives to like be trans and transition publicly and to have like a passport that says female. Like none of that is even like reasonable from like that kind of context that she comes from. So, you know, I don't give the benefit of the doubt to any of these comments from Donald Trump, from J.K. Rowling, from Elon Musk. I don't believe that they buy it. Yeah, I feel like there's just been relentless bullying towards this woman. And again, like, I think the question of unfair physical advantages is just like so interesting to me because, you know, we can treat sports like a science experiment if we want to. We can like control for every possible variable and make sure that every single player in every competition, you know, has the same height and the same weight and the same amount of hormones that impact, you know, performance, and the same, you know, muscle density, is on the same diet and had the same amount of sleep, you know, gets the same amount of sleep every night. And we can try to control, you know, sports like in this very scientific experiment kind of way. I don't think it's going to work very well. I don't think we'll succeed there. And so I think we have to just look at reality for what it is, which is that sports is just, you know, a range of people with all sorts of different physical advantages, disadvantages, typically people who have some advantages over, you know, those of us who aren't athletes, competing against one another. And so I just think that it's incredibly just disgusting the way that she's been treated. I did see that she's suing for defamation. You know, I'm not a lawyer or a legal scholar or, you know, a journalist that deals specifically on legal matters, but I do hope that she sues everybody who is, you know, publicly berating her, you know, anybody possible that she possibly can, because I just think that, you know, she has been tormented and harassed endlessly. And I think that, again, there's just like so many questions. About her gender, I think some of that, what I'm seeing in terms of some of these questions are like hormone related. Like, okay, is she as a woman, like, does she have too much testosterone to qualify as female? Like, what kind of question is that? Like, let's really think about what that means. Like, we know that all women have testosterone, right? Like, men and women all have testosterone. If we're going to be like imposing limits, then, and I also saw something this morning saying that she is like, it was a sports media outlet. I think it's called 9. I have to check with the source and I'll fact check that on this call, but saying basically that she, like Caster Semenya, she is being required to reduce her testosterone level through like certain medications. I also think that's ridiculous, to be honest. I feel like it's literally the equivalent of somehow trying to make taller people shorter so that short people aren't sad when the basketball players are competing. Like, if a woman can only have X amount of testosterone, then what's next? Like, what height is too tall to be a woman? How much muscle density is too much muscle to be a woman? You know, so I just feel like we're really in this dangerous, like slippery slope here.
All fair points. And
one more thing I want to add, sure. Especially the way Donald Trump talked about this, but I think across the board, the way she was treated, the way Caster Semenya has been treated, and the way a lot of Black or African female athletes are treated, I think there's a very strong like racial component also to this conversation. And I don't see that being talked about as much, but I really do think that there's a specific sort of dynamic that's at play here, especially with this like Italian woman who was the first one to kind of open her mouth and start to cause this sort of outrage. I feel like we see this time and time again, even with outside of this particular example, Caster Semenya, I think also as an African woman got treated and portrayed a specific type of way. But even women who like we know very well, women from the US, for example, who we could follow their whole lives and whole trajectories, also get treated in a similar way. We can look at, for example, Serena Williams throughout her career, and like the way she's been depicted as this like sometimes this like brute, this like super like masculine Black woman. I feel like it's the same kind of trope that we're seeing here. I think it's deeply racialized. I think we've seen so much like white woman crocodile tears in sports when they're faced with like African women or Black women that are just better competitors. I mean, just better athletes in specific competitions. And I think that's what's going on here.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that the International Olympic Committee, which has very stringent guidelines, approved her to box and agreed that she is a woman, right? So whatever their rules are and their guidelines are, the International Olympic Committee is always looking for fairness, and they ensure that everyone goes through the same strict protocols. I think the only place where there's a potential modicum of validity to the questions is just around combat sports, because there is always a conversation about that. But again, if it's a combat sport and they pass the weight requirement, because when it comes to boxing in particular, boxing is always done in weight classes, right? And so they determined that she passes all physical tests required to be able to participate, and she was in the proper weight class. Again, William had also mentioned that she did lose 9 bouts. This particular Olympics, she did win the gold. She did not win the gold in Tokyo. And so now skill and strength are 2 different things, but I think it's very clear that the Olympic Committee have decided to allow her to participate. And so that already just tells you right there. I mean, they are all about fairness. That's their whole thing. And so, and Inem, you mentioned it, in Algeria, being trans is outlawed, right? So the fact that people were running with that story, I think is ridiculous, as you mentioned, because, you could just do a quick Google search or even use AI search, whatever you want to look at, and you can see that Algeria has outlawed trans people in general. So there'd be no way that they would allow someone to get all the way through the ranks in boxing and compete for the country and to have transitioned. So what we heard in that video that we are, kind of reacting to now was outright lies, like entire backstory that was fabricated and clearly is just not true. So with that being said, there is one more video that we do want to get into on this topic because it does kind of give a little bit more context for what's been happening since some of this misinformation. And, the video that we watched a little earlier that kind of opened up the live was William speaking about her on the way to competing in the semifinals. But now she has won the gold. So, she was sent to her country and sent her country into wild celebrations with this historic win. But she hasn't finished fighting yet. As we mentioned, she did launch a legal battle against those who harassed her over the false claims that she was a man. She defeated China's Yang Lu to lift the women's 66-kilogram crown after suffering days of online hate. It followed her victory in her first fight against the Italian opponent, which we've already mentioned. The media then focused on the disqualification from last year's World Championships after failing the unspecified gender test that we already talked about. However, as we mentioned, Olympic chiefs cleared her to fight in Paris, claiming, as we already know, that she's always been a woman. Sadly, that didn't stop prominent figures that we mentioned, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and J.K. Rowling, to cast doubt on her gender. I think it's also important to mention, too, that she worked very, very hard with her mother selling fish and hiding the fact that she was going into boxing because her father did not believe that women should box, right? So even that backstory gives you information and insight into the fact that she's always been a woman, right? Her father said that women should not box. In his opinion, women should not be able to box. So her and her mother, this is her dream, her and her mother went out and were working as, fish salesmen or salespeople, and were working to be able to generate enough income so that she could follow her dream and eventually represent her country and win the gold for her country. And so I think it's really important to mention that, because I'm not sure if that backstory will be discussed in this video, but I did want to put that out there, that her father does not agree with women's boxing and did not want his daughter to be boxing. So just to kind of further drive that point home. But we'll jump into this video and then we'll have some more further commentary on the other side.
والحمد لله انها ربحت وفخرت المراه الجزائريه وسكرها في العديان كما نقولوا. كامل الناس اللي كانوا ضدها، حتى الناس زعما المعروفين ياسر اللي وقفوا ضدها وقالوا هذاك الكلام السيء اللي جرحها. بصح انا اعتقد انه هذه الحاجه اللي دفعتها وانها شرفت الجزائر وجابت الميداليه الذهبيه.
So there you see the support from Algeria, right? Very, very excited. I mean, obviously, look, a country as large as Algeria hasn't won gold in this particular event. I know that they had a couple of other medal finalists as well, but this is a real big source of country pride. So I think what we're seeing here is that, it's not just one person against all these folks. You now have ignited a country. Right. It was really interesting to see how, Algerians rallied in support for her. But love to get your thoughts on this video and the subsequent conversations about the legal case and, how the people of Algeria have responded.
I'm so happy for her. I think regardless of anything, nothing can take away the fact that she won. She's bringing home gold. I'm happy for the people of Algeria. I know her country must be super proud of her. I feel like the media has done everything that they can to tear this woman down. And, I think this is, regardless, a proud moment. I think, again, it's like she has this whole boxing career. She's competed how many times before? And it's only now that she's really at the absolute top that all of a sudden it's like, oh, we have to question her gender. We have to question this and that. Like, you wait until, she's like number one. She's this world champion who's just won gold. And now all of a sudden it's like, okay, time to open our mouths and complain this and that. And, I feel like the majority of our comments kind of do understand what I was saying with this sort of angle in terms of the fact that this is like, there's a strong racist, it's like very sexist, but it's also like a very racist story. Because again, like I've never seen like white women athletes treated this way, but I keep seeing, this same kind of dynamic time and time again when it's African women or Black women or women of color in general who are competing in sports. I don't know. I just see so many parallels. Like I know the obvious one is Caster Semenya, but I feel like even like Serena Williams' tennis career, I just feel like she's always depicted as like this, like, I don't know, very like brutish woman. And there's always like these white women who are like crying and like, oh my God, she's so mean. And she's like, it's not fair, and this and that. I just feel like I always see this. And so it's like, I don't know. I guess it's part of our excellence is that it comes with haters at this point. I guess that's just what it is. I mean, obviously there's like, there's historical context to white supremacy, colonialism, and, you know, all these people who have these mics, you know, Elon Musk gets to have his platform and Donald Trump gets to have his platform. And there's all this power that these people hold, obviously. But I feel like, again, some of it is just like, you know, I feel like there's just some haters out here.
Yes, agreed. And I think this also calls into question, I think, just an overall view of the continent of Africa as well. Because I think, you know, if this was, let's say this was somebody, I think from like a European country, I think people would have probably done a little bit more research before going out on the stump in a campaign rally, or likely the owner of a platform that is where, you know, something like 80% of the folks who use the platform is where they get their news from. They might have done a little bit more research before posting what they posted, or someone who's written a very popular book series that became a very popular movie series would also do some research before kind of making those comments the way they did. And then, you know, obviously you think about how South Sudan was treated, you know, right before they played the United States in that friendly round. And then, you know, if not for a last second layup by LeBron James, South Sudan would have beaten the United States. And so just the overall disrespect to the continent of Africa, people of color, by people from the West. I think this is kind of, it kind of gets thrown into that as well. So yeah, I mean, this story is obviously one that was, that had a lot of controversy around the world from many folks. I think, you know, now it seems as though that everyone's aware of the situation. And I think, you know, although there aren't any retractions being issued, the narrative is changing. And so, you know, ideally we'd like to be in a world where those who made all those false statements would issue retractions and apologize, but we're not in that world right now. So, you know, I guess where we are now is that, you know, the world is waking up and Algeria has a gold, and we're in a place now where, you know, we are at least changing the narrative. And so we wanted to cover this story because many didn't. And so we thought it was important, especially because there is an Africa angle here, both for Caster Semenya and Semenya, if I'm mispronouncing her name, and then also for Khelif. So with that, there are some other stories we'd like to kind of get into from around the continent. And we want to pivot now to some updates from the reporting we did last on the protest in Nigeria last week. So if you guys remember, last week we discussed, you know, the protests in Nigeria where many people took to the streets, and at least 13 people at the time of the reporting last week had experienced loss of life due to police violence. And that number, and they said something like 170 people were arrested. And so today what we want to do is, you know, give you a bit of an update on where we are now and some of the things that happened that have been reported since. I mean, last week it was a very new story had just happened. So we had a guest on kind of expressing and explaining what his experience was. But now we get a chance to kind of hear from the people on the ground in different walks of life about their experience and what they think. So, you know, I think the first video we want to play is a Nigerian lawyer and activist, you know, recently criticizing the current president, Bola Tinubu's leadership, saying that his supposed supporters said, don't worry, he's a master strategist. He built Lagos. He's coming to build Nigeria. That's what President Tinubu's supporters were saying. Now, President Tinubu was the former Lagos state governor. He does have a reputation for building the coastal state into an economic hub, but he has not kept his promise of prosperity to all of Nigeria. During his first year as president, His policies have driven thousands of Nigerians to protest in cities such as Lagos, Abuja, Kano, and Port Harcourt against high costs of living. Inflation is at its peak in almost 3 decades, leaving many Nigerians hungry. So according to the Nigerian government, 40% of people are below the poverty line. So during the 10 days of the scheduled protest that kicked off on the 1st of August, at least 40 protesters had lost their lives. That's the updated number, while police have arrested and detained hundreds during the End Bad Government's protest, according to the Youth Rights Commission. So we'll jump to a video and give some commentary on the other side.
Tinubu is making me miss Buhari as bad as Buhari is. Because Buhari cannot recognize even the country he destroyed. Aliko Dangote is a shameless guy. He uses Nigerian money to become African richest man every year. Tinubu took nepotism to another level. They will make 13 announcements. 11 is Yoruba. His supposed supporters said, don't worry, he's a master strategist. He built Lagos, he's coming to build Nigeria.
Yeah, so, I mean, as you can see, there's a lot of frustration on the ground. And, we played last week, we played a video of Tinubu while the former president, prior to the last administration, the opposition party was in power. He spoke like a true revolutionary, and spoke about the idea of change. And I think the people of Nigeria are not seeing that change. But I'd love to get your thoughts, Inem, as we've talked about, someone of Nigerian descent and living on the continent. What are your thoughts about, what this lawyer said and kind of the overall sentiment of Tinubu and the protests and the subsequent, loss of life that happened in the protests since it began?
Yeah, I mean, I want to first of all encourage all of the people who are watching this to go and watch last week's episode, because our comrade Adebayo, who was on last week, I feel like he did an excellent job of giving a lot of context as to what's going on the ground in Nigeria, that all the things that led up to this these protests that have broken out across the country. Nigeria is a country that is suffering from the core basis of its, capitalist, extractivist economic system. And I think a lot of people look at somebody like Dangote as somebody who's going to somehow bring more sovereignty to Nigeria or save Nigeria. But like we've been seeing, and like what was talked about last week, what's actually happened is that we've ended up with a country that has some of the most tremendous class disparities probably in the world. I mean, I do know that Nigeria ranks #1 in the world in terms of the amount of people who live in extreme poverty. Prior to Nigeria was India, but Nigeria has surpassed India. So it's the #1 place in the world, like the largest population of people who live in extreme poverty live in Nigeria. And the comment about like Buhari versus Tinubu just kind of reminds me also of the general pitfalls of, bourgeois democracy, which is also something that Adebayo talked about last week, because we see this all over the place, all over the world. I mean, even our viewers who are, watching from the US can relate to that to some extent. It kind of just seems like somehow, some way, whoever we end up voting in kind of always seems to suck, more or less, for the majority of the people. And so I think Nigerians are waking up to the fact that, we need to have solutions outside of the capitalist system. We need to organize as people, as workers. I think that's why we're seeing protests, not just in Nigeria, but across the continent. Like there were obviously protests in Kenya that had a sort of similar, took a similar form of class struggle. We saw that in Kenya earlier this year. And then we also saw some protests that popped up that were kind of similar in Uganda, even the Gambia, and now in Nigeria, which is also had some labor strikes earlier this year. And so I think class consciousness is growing in the country. And I think more and more people, we need to realize that we can't rely on, this type of false democracy where we have this illusion of choice, but not really. There's no real choice at the end of the day. It's not the leaders that actually represent the people who ever seem to get put into power through this system. And so, if regular people, working class people, come together and are able to sort of organize and to exercise power, then we see another type of change that's possible. But what the system that Nigeria has right now, no, it's fundamentally, I don't want to say flawed. It's working the way it's supposed to. It's producing these really, really deep fundamental inequalities that have always existed since Nigeria's flag independence, but I think have gotten, even, worse now.
You're not a bug. Yeah, I think very well put. And, obviously I think you're echoing the sentiments of people on the ground, just, more eloquently put. And I like the call to action. But yes, and I also agree. I think everyone should go back and watch last week's live to hear from Adebayo and his experience on the ground. It's hard to explain what it's like to be in a protest and living in the country, but you got to hear from him directly. So now we want to kind of move on to the next video in this topic, and this one it just depicts what it was like for some of the folks during this week. The video is entitled "Highway Horror: Bus Tear Gas During Nigeria Protests." So this shows the moment tear gas is fired into a bus during anti-government protests in Nigeria. Amazingly, the vehicle stays on the road as the passenger hangs out of the windows for air. Amnesty International reports 21 people by the time that this video went up had experienced loss of life from the police, and I think some numbers are saying that's over 30 now, during the week-long nationwide demonstrations over the cost of living crisis. So the hardships being blamed on IMF-backed economic reforms introduced by President Tinubu that saw fuel subsidies slashed and the Naira currency devalued. Annual inflation is just below 35%, and around 31% of Nigerians live below the poverty line. As Inem already mentioned, it's the country with the most people living in impoverished conditions. The statement that Nigerians say a lot is, we carry first, we don't carry last. That is not a position you want to be first in. So with that, let's jump into this video, and we have some commentary on the other side. Stop. I mean, so many things wrong with that video. But let me ask you, Inem, after seeing that video and seeing the recklessness by the police to do that, obviously with a bus full of passengers, what are your thoughts seeing that?
I mean, I hate to say this, but who can be surprised? Honestly, who believes that Nigerian police officers are working in the interest of Nigerian people, or protecting them or serving them? I don't know anybody who really buys into that. I don't know. I feel like you'd have to know very, very, very little about Nigeria to think that, the police forces are somehow, some sort of defense or protection for regular working people, for poor people. I think we know better. In Nigeria, the whole state is set up to serve the ruling class of Nigeria. It's this minority in this country, in the country that we seem to see a lot of. We hear a lot of it. I have some friends who said something once that stuck with me. That they've never seen a country where, and they're not Nigerian. To give context, they've never been. These are people who are outside of Nigeria. They're other Africans, but they've never, been to Nigeria in particular. They've never seen a country where the masses are so well hidden, and that really stuck with me because I guess it's true. People look at a lot of Nigerian media, a lot of Nigerian pop culture, and it's just this absolute opulence, this very ostentatious, I'd say vapid ruling class that is always flexing their wealth and their luxury and their money and their privilege, in a country that is the poverty capital of the planet Earth. And the police officers obviously serve this class of people in Nigeria who own and control everything. I mean, I guess I should even use the word own loosely, because Nigeria is still a neo-colony. So it's not like, I mean, the Nigerian ruling class owns certain things within limitation, but we know that like Nigeria as a whole is set up to like, you know, be owned from the outside of the continent. You know, not even people on the continent actually own Nigeria's oil deposits or own any of Nigeria's actual resources. I don't know. I just feel like it's like, even going into Nigeria, I feel like, I don't know, it's like it's night and day from a country like Burkina Faso, just in the sense that capitalism is much more developed in Nigeria. And I think a lot of people see that as like, oh, that's wonderful, because, you know, a city like Lagos or Abuja, like certain parts get to have more infrastructure than countries like Burkina Faso and this and that. But then you look at like the actual consequences, like the economy is just overrun by these like multinationals that we don't have in a lot of other, and like most of the other West African countries that I've been to, and look at the poverty that this kind of dynamic is producing. You know, there's a serious consequence to not actually owning your wealth and resources, and that's across the board. You know, all of Africa is in that sort of stage, is in, you know, it finds itself in that sort of position. I just think that the integration within the capitalist system and slash imperialist system, to give you context, you know, we say that imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism. So as capitalism develops, it has to search for external markets. And that's what's happened in terms of the way, you know, they've penetrated a country like Nigeria. And so, you know, we see that Nigeria, relative to some other West African countries around, is like slightly more integrated into the capitalist system and has much, much more class disparity, a much more developed bourgeoisie class. And we see it, you know, celebrated in the media, but that I think this is really showing that there's like a flip side to it. And that flip side is the majority. It's, you know, over 90% of the country is the flip side of that opulence and that wealth that we see, you know, depicted from, you know, the outside of what Nigeria is. And also I'll give some context, because I know, like, you know, we have some viewers who might live in like Western countries and they might be like, what are you talking about? Like, Nigeria, when I look on the TV, Nigeria is like a poor African country. So I guess I think it's like relative to where you are. So like here in Burkina, for example, like people think of like Nigeria on the, like from a Burkinabe sort of eye is like, wow, you know, like that's like you know, a country where I see like just luxury and wealth. You know, of course, you know, you may be like in a Western country and you may not see Nigeria necessarily represented that way on the TV, but I do think that there is like a lot of focus on a very, very small class of Nigerians who are doing very well at the expense of the vast majority of Nigerian people, Nigerian citizens. And also, lack of this, like, I also feel like, well, maybe I'll save this one because I know you have other videos to watch.
Okay, fair. Yeah, I think all good points. And I would just say, you know, you spoke a lot about the ruling class, right? And imperialism is, you know, basically capitalism, you know, at its peak. And I think that this next video kind of speaks to how that can corrupt individuals within, you know, who operate within that system, right? So, and this is the topic of bribery and bribing, you know, folks to disrupt the protest. So there's now a video being surfaced of a Nigerian anti-government protester alleging that President Tinubu's government paid citizens to disrupt protests that have rocked the country over the cost of living crisis. So this unnamed man said people received 5,000 naira, which is equivalent to about $3, to disrupt the End Bad Government's demonstrations in the capital of Abuja. Like what happened in Kenya, like the folks in Kenya who have protested tax hikes for the past 2 months, Nigerians are crying out on the streets against International Monetary Fund approved economic policies that have spiked the cost of living. Nigeria is oil rich and has suffered an economic crisis since Tinubu scrapped a decades-old fuel subsidy and lowered the value of the Nigerian currency, the naira, to attract foreign investments after taking office in May 2023. Inflation has climbed to a 28-year high, of 34.1% as of mid-July, while the naira had depreciated to a record low against the US dollar. So Nigeria is also combating an armed insurgency that as of 2021 had killed more than 350,000 people, mostly children below the age of 5, according to the United Nations Development Program report. So, you know, to your point, Inem, you know, this feature, not a bug, you know, leads to comments and videos like this where, you know, they're allegedly giving money to people to disrupt the government, which allow then, of course, the police to operate with impunity. And so, yeah, I just go to this video and then give some commentary on the other side.
I am among the people that they give 5,000. They gave me day before yesterday, yes, for this upper resettlement town hall. They gather people, they give them 5,000, and I am among. I'm KK people, I'm KK man. I carry many people go there and they give them 5,000, and I am the person that they give 5,000 naira. They lecture us that time, say, don't go to protest. Because
who gave you 5,000 naira?
I don't know the name of the person because I don't know them. They just come and with this this chairman, Amak chairman, he visited the place and they give people 5,000. Anybody, they will no count. Anybody will reach that, they will give him 5,000, and they will tell you that we cannot no go there. Don't go there. What they tell us is say there's people that they want to make problem on this protest. That's why. So this 5,000 they give people to come and destroy our peaceful protest. Is the people that they come in and destroy our protest since yesterday. Yes. Since yesterday, they are the people. See, after that, yesterday they start shooting us with tear gas. Today they start shooting us with the live ammunition.
So I'd love to hear your thoughts. I mean, I think this you know, dovetails, you know, directly into what you were saying earlier about, you know, the ruling class and how they operate. What are your thoughts on this particular video?
I mean, before the protests even started, we saw anti-protest protests. Like, I mean, obviously people were getting paid. I don't think that's a shocking thing. It happens across the continent. You know, I think there's a question of values here, but I also think that there's a question of like desperation and suffering at the same time. And I think that, you know, both of those things probably do need to be looked at and addressed. I think that values need to change. I don't want to be like too hard on Nigeria, but I think that, you know, there are like, I think that there's so much propaganda. There's kind of like, I think the way the media is representing a lot of like this new generation of Nigerian wealth, like especially through the music industry, to some extent Nollywood, I feel like, especially the music industry though, I feel like they're trying to promote, and it's clearly failing with these protests, this sort of idea of like this Nigerian dream, you know, because WizKid likes to talk about, you know, he started from the bottom, you know, he came, look where he came from, and then, you know, look at where he is, this and that kind of thing. And I think that we just have, there's a like, we have to combat this individualistic mindset of like individual achievement. Like everybody wants to do well individually, or everybody wants to do well, you know, for their specific children, and to have like a more collectivist outlook in terms of how we approach things. I saw one comment here. Nigerians need to stop running away from their problems, stay in your country and fight that wicked government. Honestly, I agree 1,000%, 1,000% I agree. Obviously, I'm not in Nigeria right now. I have nothing opposed to living in Nigeria, but I am in, you know, Nigeria's neighborhood. I chose to come back to West Africa, you know, even though I wasn't born on the continent, but I feel strongly about that, because I feel like again, I think there's a lot of class questions here, but I feel like there's too much like running away from Nigeria's problems and not trying to actually confront things collectively, especially for those that do leave. I mean, I feel like personally, I'm speaking from a diasporic perspective, right? I speak strictly from like a diaspora lens here, but I feel like I grew up around so many people who would kind of sit around talking about how is it that there's so many accomplished Nigerians who are doing so well individually? You know, we have all these I don't know, doctors and engineers and this and that, and then Nigeria is not doing well, and one day somebody should do something about it, this and that. And again, I think it's strongly like a class question. I think a lot of the if you live in some places like, you know, the US, Canada, UK, the Nigerians that you interact with come from a certain class background most of the time, so there's already that. But it's also just like, I don't know, it just bothers me that people like sit around talking about like, oh, like Nigeria is so broken, but it's like, what are you doing about it? So I'm glad to see that more people are organizing. You know, more people are on the streets right now. We need to be very clear on this. Again, the class question is, needs to be like Nigerian working class, because I really feel like Nigeria has a bourgeoisie class and a petty bourgeoisie class that is just not with the masses of the people, and they're the ones who I feel like the mic is always given to them. Like we always hear from them. They're obviously, I talked about, they're overrepresented in media, but also like just for those of us who have like lived in the West, I just feel like we are always hearing like perspectives from people who come from like a certain class background most of the time. And so again, I just feel like we need to have this kind of mentality. There's so much like brain drain, so much, it's just like ridiculous. And again, I think some of it is values. We talked about political education last week. Somebody said that, you know, they agreed with what I was saying in terms of coming together and organizing, but also the education piece. So yes, like the political education piece is so important. I think it's tied to this question of values. Like we have to be fighting for something that's greater than us. We have to be fighting for something that's greater than our just individual accomplishments or personal family accomplishments.
Well put, all very well put. And I think that really perfectly encapsulates everything that we're seeing here. You know, I think we want to shift gears a bit. I know we're a bit over our normal time, but we did start a little bit late. We did want to talk a little bit about the UK riots that are happening in the UK, the Islamophobic, the xenophobic, the racist, whatever you want to call them, the riots that are happening in the UK. You know, it's been talked about on the platform, and so we thought we'd cover it here. I think, you know, and for those of you who aren't aware, because there may be folks who aren't aware, there's been an explosion of racial violence in the UK this month. And it seems like it's been a long time coming. One of the folks from African Stream actually summed up what happened, why it's happened, and why it matters. And this, I think, is really insightful and kind of gives you the background of what's been happening. So let's throw to that video, and we'll have some commentary on the other side.
Black men attacked, Asian men attacked, mosques attacked, Muslim women attacked, even Muslim graves were attacked. These men won't even leave the dead alone. 25 versus 1 street beatings, violent riots and arson, fake news, xenophobia, and the targeting of asylum seekers. Oh, and children shouting "Pakis out" while casually strolling with their mum down the street. These are just some of the depressing incidents coming out of the UK recently. It all started late last month during a Taylor Swift themed dance and yoga workshop at a community centre in Southport, England. 3 young girls were stabbed to death. The suspect is 17-year-old Axel Urudakubana. An anti-immigrant misinformation campaign suggested the teenager was a Muslim asylum seeker who came to the UK illegally on a boat. But it was all fake news. Turns out he was born in Cardiff to Christian Rwandan parents. But the far right wanted blood and carried on blaming immigrants, refugees, and Muslims, Asians, blacks, basically anyone non-white. And so the xenophobic, Islamophobic campaign intensified on social media and on the streets. It's funny, right? Instagram has time to shadow ban you for talking about Palestine and revolution, but when racists start posting, everything goes viral. Over the weekend, crowds of these extremists set fire to hotels housing asylum seekers, while thousands across the UK damaged public buildings, looted, and clashed with police, throwing objects at officers and smashing their vehicles. Nearly 400 have been arrested as of Monday, August 5th. Now, just in case you're wondering where in the UK this is happening, here's the racism weather map. From Weymouth and Bristol in the south, to Tamworth and Leicester in the Midlands, up to Manchester and Liverpool in the north, up onto Sunderland even further north, and turning west Belfast in Northern Ireland. Plus, many places in between. So, you get the point. The problem runs pretty deep. If you're wondering who, apart from internet trolls, would instigate racist riots, look no further than these 2 hate-mongering agitators, Tommy Robinson and Nigel Farage. Robinson, the former leader of the English Defence League, basically a hooligan army of English racists, he's actually on the run, wanted for contempt of court after he repeated false claims about a Syrian boy that saw him lose a libel case a few years back. Even his lawyer quit after the riots. And here's the screenshot. He actually said, between you and the Zionists, you are destroying our country. But hey, Tommy's still posting them. Faraj, meanwhile, is a sitting MP and the leader of the Anti-Immigrant Reform Party. He's the guy who spouted lie after lie to convince Brits that it was in their best interest to do a Brexit on themselves to stop immigration while being married to a German immigrant. Lol. His next big goal, apparently, is to get Brits to do a civil war. Faraj actually tried to justify the riots, comparing them to the BLM movement, adding that what's happened so far is nothing compared with what will happen in the next few weeks. Like, mate, we can't breathe because of people like you, bruv, yeah? Now, according to the Migration Observatory, 0.6% of the UK's population are asylum seekers, so they can hardly be blamed for its economic problems. Second, UK politicians and their press backers have been quoting the far right for years. If people in media, politics, and the wider public cannot quickly and decisively denounce and punish racism and xenophobia, then they are part of the problem. Also, this whole, where is the murderer from? What religion does he believe in? This is nonsense, because one's individual's actions cannot in any way, shape, or form represent a whole race, community, ethnicity, or religion. Finally though, since the attacker wasn't actually Muslim, an immigrant, or a refugee, what are all you Muppets writing about? I'm Ahmed, that was African 90. Until the next one, fam.
Yeah, I think this video perfectly encapsulated what happened. I mean, misinformation is, I think is the theme of today's story. I think, look, he mentioned three things. He wasn't Muslim, he wasn't an immigrant, and he wasn't an asylum seeker, right? He is a UK citizen who probably has some, likely had some mental issues. And I think that should be a question about how they should handle folks that are dealing with, challenges mentally. But beyond all of that, right, the misinformation campaign and Nigel Farage, the guy himself, who is the person who talked about Brexit in the sense that he felt that Brexit was going to be the best idea for the UK economically, and it hasn't actually bore out that way. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what's been happening in the UK over the last week or so, and in this video in particular.
Yeah, I want to read Ameka's comment again when she says Nigerians need to stop running away from their problems, stay in your country and fight that wicked government. Because isn't the theme of this episode that we need to actually fight for Africa? Because what is going on in the UK? We're going to these places and building up the economies of the West, and then they're just turning around and rioting and being violent and screaming that we need to get out. Look, I get why a lot of immigrants have come to the UK in the first place. They're following where our money is, right? Africa's wealth is flowing from this direction to that direction, and they're following where Africa's resources are flowing. So in a way, that it is their rightful sort of material wealth that they're following after. At the same time, all of these stories, the first one, this one, they make me think of something that a great Pan-Africanist, Kwame Ture, once said. He said that until Africa is free, no African anywhere will ever be free or respected. And I think that's very, very powerful. I think what we're seeing in the UK speaks so clearly to that. And it's not just Africans, obviously. Asian people are being targeted. Muslims, though honestly, most of the Muslims in the UK either come from the Asian continent or the African continent, overwhelmingly. But again, the problem to me is that we just are not a liberated people. We don't have Pan-Africanism. So everywhere we go, we're treated very, very, very badly. And we're at the will of these, I don't know, these other countries who are at their grace to see whether or not they treat us right. And most of the time they don't. They're treated, they look at what's going on in the UK, they don't want us there. Clearly, they don't want most of the African and Indian or Asian people in the UK. And again, like, I understand, like, we have a right to be there because they came and colonized all these places first. You know, who are the people of color, or rather the colonized people who live in the UK? They're overwhelmingly people who come from former British colonies, places that are either or were once part of the Commonwealth. I feel like once our homelands are liberated, once Africa is like in a strong position, this kind of thing becomes impossible. You know, this is why we fight for Pan-Africanism for Africans everywhere. You know, I feel like, you know, again, I know like a lot of people who are targeted are not from Africa, but honestly, they're also from parts of the world that are under some sort of imperialist control. So it's this, we see the same sort of pattern. Like if your country, where your homeland is being destroyed by imperialism, then when you go to another place in the world, you're not treated very well. You're not really in a power position when you immigrate. So there's a lot of fight that has to happen, and a lot of it has to begin from our home base, so that everywhere we go from that point on, we're free. And I think, you know, Malcolm X, he gave this example using China. He said that in the past, people used to say this quote, like, you don't have a Chinaman's chance. That used to be like a terrible insult, by the way, but you don't hear that anymore. Like, people don't say that. And it's true. The West right now, the United States, they can't stand China. Like, they really don't like China. Donald Trump speaks about it pretty blatantly. Like, I can almost hear it in his like voice, like the way he even says the word is with like vitriol. But you won't see Chinese people being gunned down or stabbed in the streets. It's too risky because China could stick up with them. You know, China's too powerful for them to just go around killing all these Chinese people, targeting these Chinese people. It's too much. China is too much in a power position for that to happen. So if African people want to be in a power position where we can live anywhere in peace and not have to worry about these racist riots breaking out, you know, our children being at risk, you know, our family members being at risk, then we have to have a strong home base that's liberated from imperialism and that actually means something on the world stage, so that we can't just be like messed around with. And again, it's the same, like the other people who are being targeted in these attacks come mostly from like Western Asia, the part of that they call like the Middle East, quote unquote, right? That part of Asia that is like also just like being attacked by imperialism. So it's like, if they control your homeland, then they control you everywhere.
Well put. I think, you know, and to your point, there is another video, and I think we'll make this the last video of the day, where, you know, viral clip where a content creator, she goes by the name of the Black Karen, points out how migrants have long benefited Britain. Victory in World War II was in no small part thanks to India's massive volunteer force fighting alongside the Allies. We also shouldn't forget the 500,000 Africans that joined their ranks to defeat Hitler. So after the war, people from the colonies and Commonwealth arrived in the UK to help rebuild the country. Large numbers of migrants came from the Caribbean, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. So the UK story is one of continuous and evolving migration, with each group shaping UK's diverse and dynamic society. So let's jump into that video to kind of give people a reminder of that history lesson, and we'll have some commentary on the other side.
You want to start racist riots around the UK, but you don't know your history. Well, I'm here to give you a history lesson. The reason why immigrants came to this dusty, dingy country is because half of your men were wiped out by World War II. They didn't do it because they wanted equality. They didn't do it because they wanted diversity. They wanted black people to come over to this country and rebuild it again. And you want to know the real reason why you won World War II? It's because India, India sent around 1.2 million Indians to come and fight the fight because they were part of the Commonwealth, you understand? So if you knew your history, you wouldn't be going after immigrants so hard. America didn't save your heart. It was India, yeah? And you people ain't gonna work for £5 an hour in a factory. You best stay in benefits. So instead of being angry at the immigrants trying to make an honest living, I suggest you look towards the Houses of Parliament, because those are the people who put you in poverty.
There it is. The Black Karen had a lot to say there. Inem, what are your thoughts on that history? How much these Brexiters and the like forget?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a large extent to which so-called immigration is coerced or forced, because again, like the UK's wealth belongs to us. Like that's our wealth, that's our money, that's our resources that they're holding. You know, they've seized basically all of our, you know, assets, and they're holding it over there. And so I think that there is like an extent to which people are going over to these Western countries because they understand that they have to reclaim what does rightfully belong to us to some extent, and or to a large extent rather. And also because again, like the UK this whole thing started when the United Kingdom decided to invade like 3/4 of the world, and you know, develop this massive drain of our resources and our wealth, and you know, accumulate all that belongs to us over there. You know, after they very violently, very forcefully first came, you know, to Africa and to parts of Asia and parts of the Caribbean. So I think that history really needs to be acknowledged. You know, I think, again, I still believe that even though I think that we have every right to reclaim our wealth. I think that they don't get to tell us where we go. So like they don't have any moral authority or like any type of authority given, you know, history to say, you know, who doesn't or doesn't belong in the UK. I still think that our number one fight though has to be for our homelands though. Like at the end of the day, how are we going to take that wealth that they stole back is through engaging in the struggle for the liberation of our homelands. And so we really, really have to have that mentality when we look at some of these questions. Like we have to look at the reality that, you know, they came and invaded our lands, they hold our wealth, and because of that, we tend to flee in that direction. At the same time, we have to develop, you know, where we come from. Like, for example, if you look at Ghana, there was a story that broke out in the news last year that there are more Ghanaian nurses, I don't know if it's healthcare workers in general or just nurses, that are in the NHS, that's the British public health service. There's more Ghanaian nurses there than in the entirety of Ghana. And that's like a serious issue. So I talked about the brain drain, even with the Nigeria story. It's like we need to have the value of really fighting to liberate our homelands. And, you know, even people who live out in the UK or other places, the US, whatnot, can still be engaged in a struggle for the liberation of their homelands and can still tap in and be part of that fight from a distance, because we need, you know, African people who are going to be, you know, taking those resources that were stolen from Africa and finding ways to transfer them back over and that kind of thing. And so I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, like on every front. But I really want people to have that perspective that the struggle does start in Africa, and it's not going to get better in the UK until, you know, Africa, you know, things start to change, you know, back home, back here. And so I think, you know, that's something like a very important context that we need to keep in mind.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's why we're all about Pan-Africanism, because we want to ensure that our homeland is a place where people feel like they can live the African dream instead of looking for the American dream or the UK dream, right? I mean, if you want to, fine, but we want our homeland to be a place where people feel like they can live out their dreams and not feel like they have to leave and go elsewhere. You know, we started a bit late. We wanted to give you guys a content-packed live stream and discussion today. Again, the main topic was a controversial one. I saw some comments, and there are some folks on opposite ends of that of this story. And you know, as it develops, we will continue to share the information and insight into it. Same thing with the Nigerian story. You know, with the protests and what happens there if Tinubu actually ends up making any adjustments or changes, like we did see with Ruto, even though, you know, he fired his whole cabinet, but he didn't step down. In Kenya, We'll see what happens in Nigeria if any changes happen. Hopefully this does have a positive impact. And then lastly, of course, we will continue to follow what's happening in the UK, as this one is a scary one, and we want to make sure we're on top of giving you guys all the updates. With that, are there any more final thoughts that you have, Inem, before we call this one and bring it to a close?
I guess just concluding thoughts. I do see a comment here that says countries like Tanzania and Rwanda, you're not allowed to criticize corrupt puppet leaders who sell 20% of land and corrupt officials who steal billions. If you don't believe me, visit there and find out. I don't know if that's like part in response to what I was saying, but I do think it's related maybe to what I was saying. And I think that, to be honest, like to me, it's like all the more reason to fight, because I mean, I hear this all the time. Like the reason why we have to leave is because the leaders are awful. The pay is bad. The jobs are bad. The jobs aren't there. There's consequences if we stay back home and we struggle. It's, we get into too much trouble. And I totally agree. Like the risks are enormous when you have a country that is firmly entrenched in the neo-colonial system. There are serious consequences to fighting against that system. But it's like, if we don't do it, who is going to do it? It's like I have this conversation all the time with, like, for example, Nigerians who live in the US or other places. It's like, why would I go and be like a doctor in Nigeria when the healthcare system is a total mess? I couldn't, a lot of doctors and healthcare professionals can't even take care of their families. Why am I going to go do it out there? But it's like, what is the solution? Is every single person who has any iota of opportunity to leave going to just get up and leave? And then meanwhile, look at what direction the Europeans are moving. They're going this way. They're coming in, right? Like the people who have all the power and access, the imperialists and the imperialists from Europe basically are moving. We're moving that way. They're moving this way. And, they can't wait to come in and we can't wait to get out. So if that's our mentality, then who is going to stay and fight? Who? How is it going to change? Like, what way will it change if we have this mentality of like, the going gets rough, the only thing that we can do is flee? I don't know. I just feel like our lives have to mean more than just like our own individual well-being at the end of the day, or we're going to stay in this position for literally generations to come. So we really have to, I think, just have a purpose that's greater than just, what we're going to get out of it as individuals. And I know it's not easy. It is not easy. So yeah, those are my final words. I'll leave it there.
Well put. And, look, and guys, if this live was informational and helpful, you found it interesting, make sure you hit that thumbs up. Of course, if you haven't already, subscribe to both of our channels. Subscribe to African Stream if you're following from Authentic African, or subscribe to Authentic African if you're following from African Stream. Follow us across all platforms. We are on Twitter. A good number of you, or X, a good number of you are watching from X today. So those of you who are watching from X, make sure to follow all platforms and stay up to date on today's news. With that, we want to thank you all for watching, and we will see you again next week. Bye, guys.